And good evening, I'm Jack Fink. Welcome to our Facebook Live. I am the political reporter here at CBS 11 in Dallas-Fort Worth. Tonight, our topic, school safety. After that horrific shooting at the Florida high school back in February, 17 people were killed. And so tonight we want to know what should or could be done to prevent further shootings at schools. As always, we have assembled a great panel to talk about this. Starting from my left is Jara Hutchins, a firearms instructor at Defender Outdoor here in Fort Worth and member of the group Be Empowered, which advocates women protecting themselves with firearms on college campuses. Traylon Rogers, president of the youth chapter of the Dallas NAACP and a high school student in Dallas who was among those who led a walkout by students at Townview High School. Tom Crowley, a retired special agent at the ATF in Dallas. And Rena Honey, president of the Alliance AFT in Dallas, which represents 6,000 teachers and support staff. As always, we are going to be taking your questions and comments. We want to hear from you on Facebook. And our producer extraordinaire, Parna Zilani, is here to help us with that. So, as always, don't be shy, but please be polite. Unfortunately, right off the bat tonight, we're going to have to talk about that horrible shooting in California today. We have a live chopper over the scene at the YouTube headquarters. Police there say 3 people were shot, one of them critically. Authorities say the shooter is a woman and that she died from a self-inflicted gunshot injury. And the descriptions of the 3 victims are a 36-year-old man is in critical condition, a 32-year-old woman is in serious condition, and a 27-year-old woman is in fair condition. We don't know all of the details, what led up to this, but there are reports that suggest that this may have been a domestic or a relationship involved. So right off the bat, let's talk about this. Here we have another mass shooting, 3 people shot. And so I just want to ask the panel what they think about this latest shooting here. It seems like it's happening more often. Jara.
You could go that route, or you could say that the media is just giving it more attention because of the narrative right now. I feel like there's not a lot that we know about this particular situation. The little that I was able to read about it when I got here in the parking lot was that it seems to be a domestic dispute. If this was in California, from what I understand, I'd be very interested to know how she got that firearm. Did she obtain it legally or illegally? These are the big questions. So, you know, to comment on it and to give your opinion on it and not know all the information is just not wise.
Traylon.
I mean, I obviously think that we need some sort of mental health screenings, which is what I've asked for and what I'm going to continue to ask for. So I think it's just another one of those cases where we need screenings on who can buy guns and who cannot.
Tom.
Well, she's exactly right. When something like this happens, we have a 24-hour news cycle. There's news everywhere, not only on the TV, but on your phones and stuff. So everybody wants to be the first to report. We don't know yet. You got to let it play out. But more importantly, I was with ATF. I want to know how the guy got the gun. The gun's being traced right now. It's probably been traced. How she got it, was she supposed to have it or not? And it's those investigative leads by tracing the weapon that will be able to lock up the case.
Rena.
I think it's very interesting to note that the previous mass shootings, a lot have been towards schools. This one is different, and I think it shows us the vulnerability of people not knowing what's going on, not having all of the facts, but the access to the weapons is definitely problematic no matter where it is.
Let me just ask Aparna if anybody's chiming in on Facebook.
We have quite a few people already talking about it. Jeremiah Dustin Harrington says guns are not the problem. And then we have Candy Wallace. She says stop the bullying in schools and then the shootings will stop. And then, I mean, that's it for now.
Okay, well, Jeremiah and Candy, thank you so much. Let's talk about the school shootings. And let's go back to that horrible day in February, that scene that played out at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I want to know, what is it that you think can be done at schools to make them safer? Because there are a lot of ideas out there. Laws have been passed. But let me just get your thoughts in general, what can be done, and then we'll break it down bit by bit. Who wants to start? Tom?
Okay. It's a very big country. One size doesn't fit all. If you're out in West Texas, it's going to be different than if you're in Washington, D.C. So I think the locality and the local politicians and law enforcement should work their individual schools on what's best for them.
So it's a school district-based decision. I
would say so, because even in Texas, you know, the Dallas district is a lot different than districts in far West Texas.
Rena.
I'm really proud of the work that Dallas ISD has done to be preventative in the measures that they're taking. They are looking at the buildings themselves, limiting the access to one particular door. There are a lot of portable buildings in Dallas ISD, so putting peepholes in there where the teacher or someone that's been designated in the classroom to check if there's a door knock, see who that is before they allow someone in. For the office staff, when they come to the particular designated door, to be sure that they question who the person is and why they're there.
Okay. Traylon, you're at school.
I mean, I think it's an issue with the funding that we have and the resources that we have. Right now in Dallas ISD, we have a multi-million-dollar deficit, and we need the resources to be able to protect our buildings. There's state-of-art technology that can be placed inside the schools to make sure that these things don't happen. However, when we're limited to our resources, we have maybe 5 or 6 people securing maybe 30 doors, then of course it's going to be easy to get through.
Well, the district, as all the districts and even all the municipal governments go through and they look at next year, on paper there's a shortfall, but they can't really have a shortfall, so they got to sort everything out. Right. But that will obviously be part of the conversation. Jara.
I mean, I think that his point about there being a funding issue in schools is very relevant. But with that being said, why aren't we putting more metal detectors in schools? I mean, according to the National Center of Education statistics, only 10% of high schools in this country have metal detectors. I mean, how are we? I mean, we have to continue to monitor children. I mean, they're children, and if they have problems and if they have issues, behavioral or mental, and there's a ton of statistics on how we are failing these kids from a mental health standpoint. But if they're going to do that, we have to be able to monitor a little bit what they're bringing to school, and I think metal detectors are a really good way to do that. And I also failed to see how no one thought it was odd that any of these kids that were involved in these mass shootings were bringing ARs to school. They're not small firearms. They're big. How do you not notice? I mean, that's what I wonder.
And let me ask, because Traylon, I think at Dallas they use the metal detectors at schools. Isn't that right, Rena? So now, how is it that you've seen them? Because my understanding is that it's not an everyday thing, right? It's more of a random.
Well, in my school, it's every day.
Every day.
If you go out, if you come in at 6 o'clock, leave out at 6:01, come back in at 6:02, you have to go right back in it again. But again, when we have over 30 doors, but only six people at each station, then it's like, it doesn't matter if you have a metal detector at the front entrance and the back entrance, because there's a side entrance that you can go into. And we need more resources because we do have the staff in the office who can possibly multitask.
Or limit the access, like she said, to just the doors that have the metal detectors. Have those metal detectors thwarted any firearms coming into the school that you know of?
No, but I mean, they can't legally chain the doors, so the doors are always going to be there. So if I were to walk up to the door and push it open for my friend to come through, then there's nobody there to stop me.
You know, it's interesting. In preparation for this broadcast today, there was a former assistant principal out of Grand Prairie who emailed us, who said that in addition to, and some of the ideas, and this is going on at Stoneman Douglas this week, all the backpacks have to be clear, right? And all the classroom doors are locked. And the students aren't really crazy about the clear backpacks. But this assistant principal was saying one thing that she had experienced with her own principal and all that, is his thought was he wanted his administrators out in the hallways at all times throughout the day because that's the way they got to know these students. What does everybody think about that? It's not just having the equipment there, but having administrators, school administrators out there in the hallways watching everybody.
Well, I went to Catholic school in the late 60s and early 70s, and those nuns knew everything you were doing and what everybody else was doing.
You didn't want to mess around, right? Yeah.
You know, it definitely was. And again, this is early on, but they knew who belonged in the school. They knew what class you were supposed to be in, and if you weren't in there, why. And certainly you would have to answer for it. So I'm used to that, and it's a great idea.
I would agree with that. I mean, I went to a very small 2A school in East Texas, and the teachers knew us. They knew our parents. They knew our grandparents. And furthermore, my nosy Sicilian grandmother went through my backpack at least once a week. So, I mean, and her reasoning for that is you're a kid, and my responsibility is to protect you, and I need to know what's happening in your life. I need to know if you're sneaking around. And I think that thwarts a lot. But then you have these kids like David Hogg, right, who they don't want the clear backpacks. Well, I mean, you're essentially wanting to ban firearms from citizens who don't commit crimes, okay? And now the same thing is happening to you, and you don't like it. So it's very relevant.
Well, let me ask about, well, Rena, go ahead.
Yeah,
And then
I was just going to say, it's much easier in a smaller district or at a smaller campus.
Right.
But when you have a campus in Dallas, Skyline High School has 4,800 students.
Right.
One administrator or 5 on the campus cannot cover that whole building. That's why it takes more to be in the hallways. They ask teachers to monitor the hallways along with hall monitors and security people. But there's a lot of activity that goes on during the passing periods and all that. Many of our teachers have 150 to 200 students, so they do know those. Yeah. But there are a lot that they don't know. They may be familiar with faces, but to know every student is just almost impossible at a campus that large. Yeah. So we have to be proactive in coming up with other ways that we can help protect those kids. And I'll tell you, every educator that I know, and when I was in the classroom, that's your #1 priority, whatever it takes. And we've heard in every shooting at a campus, staff have died because they put themselves in front of their children, or they've sheltered those children behind them or whatever. We are there to educate the kids and to protect them, not to carry guns.
And we did see that obviously at Parkland High School, at the high school in Parkland, Florida. Let's chime in with Facebook and see what people are saying.
A lot of people commenting. Ron Carter says, "How do we make criminals obey the law?" Randy Max Collins, he says, if we are going to keep schools weapons free, we need to set them up like courthouse with security. We protect judges and courts more than our kids. Tate Messman, how are we supposed to get mental health screens with HIPAA? Then we have Dennis Brooks, there's always a way to get weapons inside, know the environment, and be able to act. We need to get more training to students and teachers. I mean, I have more.
Yeah,
want
sure
me to keep going. There are quite a few. Bobby says, mental health disorders are sometimes temporary and people can get better. But once reported to background check system as a person with a mental disorder, you're banned for life. It'll keep people from seeking treatment.
A lot of good comments there. I want to thank Ron and Randy, Kate, Dennis, and Bobby. Keep them coming. We appreciate that. Let me go back and ask Traylon, what do you think about clear backpacks? And does that really solve the problem? We'll go to everybody. But Traylon, you start us off.
I definitely think it helps. Back in 7th and 8th grade, I went to school in Arlington ISD before I came to Townview, and I came because of the education that they had. So prior to me coming to Dallas ISD, we had to have clear backpacks or mesh backpacks that were see-through, and it's a great idea because you can essentially see what's inside of the kids' backpacks in addition to the metal detectors. So I think it's a great idea.
Tom.
Yeah, as a student at school, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. You're on their terms, and whatever's safety for the total school system is what's best.
Jarrett.
Right there with him.
Okay. And Rena?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. That's not going to hide everything, because if somebody wants something in, they're going to find a way to do it. But people being educated, the adults being educated, and other kids. Dallas just started a program that the students had a lot of input on right after the Florida shooting. What can we do? And the students said, if you see something, report it. See it, say it. And building those relationships. But I think people need to understand not every person that does a shooting like this, they may not always have mental disease or a mental illness. There are other things that contribute to that. But funding comes into here because, in my opinion, our schools, our public schools, need more counselors that can actually work with students to get to their issues and the root of the problem. We need guidance counselors to help with careers, but we need also those behavioral counselors that can work with students to help them manage and get coping skills. But again, that takes money, resources, and individuals willing to do that.
Tom, you wanted to follow up.
Well, she mentioned it, and somebody on Facebook mentioned it, saying it's not going to stop every kid. It's not foolproof. But I remember going through the police academy. They taught us, you know, you're not going to get every drunk driver off the road, but should you stop looking for them? And that's the point here. You know, they're exactly right. It's not foolproof, but does it mean you don't try something?
Well, if I may.
Yes.
I totally agree with you on the counseling front, and that we are just failing our students in grandiose fashion with that, and we do need more counselors. But you also made a point that many gun owners make every day. And that is that just because if you want to do something, if you have a desire to bring something into a building that's not supposed to be there, you're probably going to get it done, okay? One of our Facebook commentators here said, how do we get criminals to obey the law? You don't. That's why they're criminals. Okay, and so we have to continue to fight, and we have to continue to try. But just as you said, an educator, when a parent drops their child off with me for babysitting, or if I'm looking after a young family member, I do it in my mindset behind that is that child's life is more important than mine. Okay, that's my mindset. And that seems to be the mindset that you think that these educators have, and I would agree with that. But why wouldn't you want the educators that wanted to volunteer to get the proper training to have a tool on them that could actually allow them to save lives instead of being a shield for bullets?
Because I think you're asking for more trouble.
Absolutely.
if you have an adult that has a gun on them, and maybe something's happening far away, they're on the other side of the building.
But that's what training does.
Well,
that's
training
what training
helps.
does.
But you also have students, especially in the secondary schools, these are large people.
Right.
They have assaulted teachers, and what if they assault a teacher and take that gun and shoot somebody else? We have a lawmaker that suggested teachers carry guns, and his child was in an elementary school. If his child were to be killed or wounded, he wouldn't want those guns in there anymore.
All right, but let's look at this statistic, okay? The statistic from Everytown Research, okay, which is very anti-gun, states that there are 13,000 gun homicides a year, okay? Mm-hmm. Do you know how many crimes a year are thwarted by firearm? And most of the time the firearm isn't even, the shot isn't even executed. It's literally just the brandishing of weapon. 2.5 million. I don't even have to tell you to do the math. It's so easy. 13,000 deaths by homicide every year versus 2.5 million crimes and potentially deaths that are thwarted by the gun every year. That's a big statistic.
But
I love the idea that we're having this conversation, and I love the idea that we want our kids to be safe. I mean, we have failed them. We have failed them. The person on Facebook that said we protect our judges and we protect those kinds of people more than we do our kids is absolutely true. But you can't make yourselves sitting ducks. It just doesn't
and
make
I don't
sense.
think we're doing that. I don't think we're doing that at all. The education piece is huge. People need to be aware. They need to know what they can and can't do, what they should and should not do. But to introduce firearms into a setting where you have students all over not knowing their backgrounds, many have a lot of issues going on, and for that split moment, that may be they're thinking that that's the only way out.
Right.
But there is
But if
not.
they're bringing them into the schools and mass shooting
but
people.
if there's, we have over 200, we'll say we have over 80 teachers in our building, and if I were to, let's say, assault one of my teachers, that gives I won't say assault. If I get aggressive with my tone and she feels threatened, and that gives her the opportunity to pull her gun out and aim it at me. And then it's going to affect minorities more than it'll affect people.
Why would you be so disrespectful to your teacher in the first place?
I mean, you just said the point about the criminals, so we can't stop people from being criminals, and we can't stop people from having those types of attitudes. However, we can help them prevent and fix whatever the root of the problem is. We can try to help it. We can't necessarily fix it 100%, but it is a step. And knowing that I have that issue, allowing a teacher to have a gun in the classroom is not going to help it at all.
Let me ask this, because we are talking about, Tom, you had mentioned before about on a district case, this is something that should be decided amongst the individual school districts. And the state did pass a law a couple sessions ago allowing school districts to arm certain teachers. There's a Marshall program. I think there's also a Guardian program. But with the Marshall program, there has to be vetting of who these teachers are and also training of these teachers. And I know there are some educators who were in law enforcement who oppose having teachers armed because they say they still question how good the training is and how often they're retrained and all that. And so I'm wondering, where do you fall on this, having been in law enforcement?
Right. Training is important, especially when you're going to use a firearm, because it's easy, and you'll attest to this, go to the range, shoot from the 5 and 7 yard line, and that's it. But during an active shooter drill, your adrenaline is flowing. You lose your sights. So training would be of the utmost importance for the teachers. Again, I think it would be on an individual school or school district basis, especially out in far reaches of Texas where law enforcement could be an hour away. So that's important for each individual district to decide. And I'm also very there's a lot of retired law enforcement around. Why don't you just hire them?
Retired military.
Yeah, hire them as armed security.
And they
would do, and they wouldn't ask an arm and leg to do it.
Well, we don't have the resources. I mean, that's just the bottom line. I mean, as much as we can ask for it on the school walkout, we have one SRO, which is a resource officer at our school, for 2,700 students. We walked outside, and it was about 2,000 of us, and they had more than 10 cop cars there. So we walk out of school, they bring more than 10 cop cars, but we stay in school and they only give us one. So it's kind of like it's obvious.
That's a pretty valid point.
Right.
I like that. But as someone who works in firearms every day, I mean, my facility trains a lot of different law enforcement agencies, and I completely back the blue, but I can tell you that they could use a lot more training. Okay, I think they only have to qualify 1 to 2 times a year. My range safety officers at my gun range have to qualify more than that. So I would take that person's opinion with a grain of salt.
So you're saying more training for everybody.
If there is something on the gun front to be advocated for, that would be it. And the training that can be provided to the average person now is insane. and it can be done in a shorter amount of time. I mean, before all these facilities like mine started popping up in the gun-friendly states, and even some not gun-friendly states, you would have to travel long distances, and you'd have to hire someone for a whole weekend, and it costs you a lot of money to get the kind of training that you can get now at Defender Outdoors in Fort Worth or any number of gun range facilities that are around. You can get it in hours. Right? There's maintenance programs now. I mean, I have over 2,000 members at my range. 21% of them are women. Right? These people are coming, they're making time because we're making it around their schedule to be able to do this. And it's absolutely wonderful. And all it does is make the community safer.
Rena.
Training is fabulous, but even veteran officers that have been trained will tell you in a crisis situation, they're not 100%. Because like Tom said, the adrenaline is flowing. There are a lot of things involved there, but training is only as good as it's practiced.
Training isn't just about the gun.
I know. There's a lot involved in that, and you can have that knowledge, but if it's not implemented and used and practiced on a regular basis, it tends to fade to some degree.
Then why not use it on a regular basis?
Because you don't have someone coming in shooting every single day.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Not at one school.
Not at one campus.
But wouldn't you rather prepare than
you would
wait?
like to be prepared, but you have
fire
a
drills.
certain
I mean,
amount.
do fire drills. I mean, at my school,
Well,
we did them almost every
They
day.
do have the shooter drills.
They
I
have
think, at
shooter
schools.
drills.
So why
they
not
have
do those
fire
more
drills
often?
because there's requirement by the state as to the amount of instructional time that students have to have. And when you put all of these other things in,
That is
kids
for
are
their
using,
safety.
It's safety, and safety is important. You're exactly right. But when you have the state lawmakers that have made evaluations of teachers and students, well, teachers specifically, their compensation is tied to test scores. And that's what we're doing. We're spending billions of dollars on testing. Our kids take more tests than they've ever taken in their lives.
I would agree.
Traylon,
And it
is that true?
awful.
Yes.
Yes, it is. In Dallas, they have a 3-week test. They have an end of course exam. They have an ACP. They have a 6 weeks test. It is astronomical, the amount of testing. And teachers tend, because their compensation is based on these kids' test scores and their surveys.
Then why
and
not
what
be
they
advocating
think.
for the change in that?
We are.
You know?
But people have to go to the vote, to the ballot box and vote people that are pro-public education, that are pro putting these things in priority, and people will vote against their own interests because they don't want their property taxes going up.
Right.
Dallas is about to hit a recapture stage to where they're going to have to send $40 million of their revenues brought in by property taxes because we are, quote, a wealthy district. But we are the highest poverty rate in the state of Texas. And so we're having to send that money away starting next year because property values are going up, but the funding for education is going down.
And that's a whole other show.
Yes, yes, it is. But testing is tied to safety to some degree, because when you have less funds, the class sizes tend to get bigger. That way teachers have more students to monitor. And when you've got 25, 30 kids in a high school class, these are oftentimes large guys and girls. So it's all tied.
I want to check into what people are saying on Facebook, and then I want to come back. I'm going to give you a preview of what questions I want to ask and what I want everybody to think about. And you and I were talking about this on the phone a couple of days ago, and that is, you know, what has happened? What has really changed? Guns have always been out there, and you said when you were growing up in East Texas, you had guns at school. No one was in the parking lot. Okay, but let's talk about what has changed in the culture. Were these shootings happening before and we just didn't really report on it as much? Or what, is it more attention, like you said, now? The media is paying more attention to it. It's more of a national story now instead of a local story. So I want to talk about that, and I do want to get back to what one of our Facebook folks said, and we've talked about it a little bit. And that is, should we have airport-style or courthouse-style security at schools? Or is that even really workable at a high school campus, which with all those doors and entrances and like that? But let's see what people are chiming in on Facebook first.
Okay, so Douglas Whitehead says, I'd rather have a teacher with a gun at 50% than nothing at all. Randy says, how safe are you with unarmed and no training? Douglas Whitehead again says, stop creating gun-free zones and stop these shootings. Sherman says, what good are test scores if you're dead, if you have dead students because of soft policies that won't protect them? I'm going through them. There are quite a few.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Douglas, Randy, and Sherman, thank you so much for chiming in. So let me get back to that question that I posed before. Well, let's start with the airport security and courthouse security. We know what happens at the airport. We've all waited in those lines. Same thing getting into a courthouse. Should the schools look like that? And is that really doable with the budgets that we have?
Well, if it's doable for the courthouse, it's doable for the school. And our government, I'm sorry, there's so much reckless spending going on in the government that could be eliminated and funneled into her schools and people who are doing the things that she's trying to do. And that's what we need to be advocating for, and that's what we need to be talking about. But for whatever reason, we're not doing that, and we're not getting any traction on that because we need to be protecting students like this. Okay, so if it's doable for the courthouse, it's doable for the school.
And there was in that $1.3 trillion spending plan that Congress just approved last month, there was a $25 million funding for this next year, 2018-2019, for schools across the country to buy metal detectors and other equipment, and then $33 million in the 2019-2020 budget. Is that enough?
I'd say no. Right now, it costs over that amount to fund essentially just one high school, probably. I know with Townview, it's like close to $20 million per school year. But
do you feel safer with the metal detectors there?
No.
Why not?
Because, again, like I said, we may have six or seven metal detectors with 30 entrances. So they're not all being monitored. And there's an elementary school across the street from us at Townview, and they have the scanners. You have to scan in order to get inside of the building, and you have a camera at the very front of the school, and you press the doorbell, and they see who it is, and they decide whether or not they'll allow you to get in. And those are effective for the areas of the doors that we don't have security monitors and or metal detectors. So I think if we had more than $30 million, then yes, we can implement those.
Tom, and then we'll get to Rena.
I like the idea, I really do, and maybe I'm skeptical of Washington, D.C. and Austin, but I think there's always money to be found. They seem to get a lot in donations for whatever their purpose is. I think there's money. And I always harken back to the airport in Tel Aviv. When's the last time they had a problem?
Rena.
The money is an issue, as always, because priorities are not on school children. Okay. The lobbyists don't go there. That's not what they want money spent for, especially in Texas. But not only is the equipment expensive, if we're going to do it right, you would need someone at every metal detector at every door. So the personnel costs begin to skyrocket. And the legislature usually does not fund that adequately at all. In the late 70s, early 80s, our state provided about 75 to 80% of the school funding for public schools. Today, we're at about 34 to 35%. So not only are they not meeting their responsibility to provide free public education for every student in the state, they have decreased it and put it everywhere else and say, you, the property owners, have to pay for the education for your students.
Let me go to that other question I had, and that was just on what has changed. Guns have always been with us here in the United States, certainly Texas. So has anything changed at all? Who wants to take that?
Well, as the older person on the panel, a lot has changed. But I mean, and it's changing every year, but you got to go to social media. First of all, the 24-hour news cycle. News is on TV, it's on your phones, and that's where people get it. And then you've got Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all this. And at times, this is how people are living their lives. So they could see something and they could copycat, or I can top this. I mean, some of these YouTube videos are outrageous. So I think that's something that, you know, you have to address or have to look at as a, you know, reasoning behind this.
It's access to all these incidents.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you have to look also at the home. Our homes are not like they used to be. I can remember I had the luxury of my mother staying at home. She worked inside the home, but there was only one person out. We had dinner together. We had conversations at the table. Now, TVs and video games and MTV and all that babysit children. The latchkey kids that go home, there's no one there. And that's been an issue to some degree.
But that's not new. I mean, the latchkey kids, I mean, that's going back decades already.
It is, but the breakup of the home, the family values that used to be there when you did things together, we don't see that anymore.
Right.
And there's not the parental engagement that used to be in our schools. And we need to get the parents more involved. But many of them see school as a babysitting service for them. And they get very upset if the child has an issue and you call them and they have to leave work because wages are down, they're working 2 and 3 jobs, they're exhausted, and that's one more problem they have to try to solve when they've left their children with the schools.
Accountability and manners. There's also, to me, it seems to me like there's a rise in mental health disorders too. You know, I mean, the American Institute for Research tells us that 20% of kids under 18 suffer emotional and mental disorders, and that equates to 15 million kids, right? 62% of kids that are in college say that they suffer from overwhelming anxiety, which is up 50% in the last 5 years. So maybe that's all the testing and ridiculousness that we're putting on kids like him, right? So they don't have time to be kids anymore. And all of these social media outlets that allow them to be bullied 24/7.
But that also goes to the point that Rena was making earlier about having more school counselors, not just guidance counselors on what classes to take, but people who actually help students get through some of these issues that they may have. Right. Is that right?
Absolutely. So many of our students, even at earlier ages, are going through so many things that they don't have the capacity or the coping skills to be able to handle. So if we could get some good counselors in, enough counselors, one counselor for 500 students is an awful lot. They can't do a whole lot. Not only are they doing the counseling when they can, and usually it's group. If they get to do that, the individual counseling doesn't really happen. So we should separate that, have guidance counselors to help with their coursework and things they need to do to get to the graduation stage, but then have the others that give them coping skills and help them deal with a parent that's incarcerated or a terminally ill someone in the family. Things like that. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe there's no electricity in the home with the poverty. So being able to find ways to get input and to be able to express what they need would be a tremendous help, I think.
Aparna.
So there are many people who've commented. Julia says trained adults with guns in schools would either prevent or end crime. Lynn Donovan says the issue with society that is different is we are at an all-time low for respect for life, respect for each other and our differences, and further a lack of empathy. This is the reason bullying is such a problem, which leads to gun violence. I have more. Give me 1 second.
No problem. Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Lynn.
Sean says Texas spends more on high school football than school safety. Melissa Riding says, personally, I'd rather be able to defend myself than wait on a phone and hope that someone shows up in time to help me. It's no surprise that all of the shootings takes place in a gun-free zone. So
and who was that?
I'm sorry, Melissa Ridings. Yeah.
All right, Melissa and Sean and Lynn and Julia, thank you so much for the comments. And you know, that comment, I think Sean said it, about Texas spends more money on football than security, but doesn't that go back to the individual school districts, right? I mean, these are local decisions that are being made.
Possibly. So, at my school, we don't have any sports at all. I mean, and like I said, the security is still hard to get. It's easy to get into. We have 2 assistant principals and 6 principals for 2,700 students, and there's just not a lot that they can do. The principals have to go to multiple meetings with the powers that be in the district, so they're in and out. And then the 2 assistant principals, I mean, it's 2,700 students, so we don't have a football team, so we don't have any sports. So their job is to protect us and teach us, and so that's still being missed because it's not being spent on football.
Well, instead of having a bond issue and build a $60 million football stadium, cut it down to $40 million and use the other 20 on security.
There we go.
Okay? I mean,
well, bond issues, you're right.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, they used the bond issues for the football stadiums.
Right.
So instead of building a $60 million one, cut it back to $40 million and put $20 million in security.
Well, what about parental volunteers for security? Because obviously this is a very personal issue for a lot of parents, as well as educators, as well as kids. And there was a story that I read after the Newton tragedy, where a father who was a former Marine stood guard at his kid's school. I mean, why can't we ask some of these parents to participate in this as well if they're willing to go through the training or they have the credentials? What if they were former or present law enforcement?
They have to be vetted. They have to go through a criminal background check. They have to go through a lot to be able to do that.
So,
and
these are their kids.
If they're willing to pay for that, they could, because the school districts don't have the money to pay for those background checks.
I never said anything about making the school district do this. I'm putting it on the parents, too.
I think I was talking to one of my colleagues several weeks ago about this, and he was telling me at his child's elementary school there are dads who volunteer and they stand guard or they walk. They
what
patrol
about
the
what if you're not even a parent? What if that's just something that you want to volunteer to do? I would do it tomorrow. But I guarantee you I have the credentials to do it, and I would certainly stand guard over a school to protect children and that would be an amazing way for me to spend my spare time. I don't see why people wouldn't do that.
But it's spare time. We need something, and something that's going to protect us 7 days or 5 days a week, 8 hours a day.
That's fine.
If I'm in my classroom, I want to be in my classroom and feel safe learning because I know somebody's watching. But there's not, I mean, we can't guarantee that a volunteer is going to be there every time of the day.
With the flexibility of work schedules that technology allows us to have these days, I bet you could find plenty of volunteers that would do that if they were allowed.
Well, they are allowed. It's available to them.
Maybe they don't know about it, and now they can.
Well, that's something to ask the school district about.
I mean,
why not send that out in an email blast? Why not put that out on social media? Why not talk about that on the radio and say, hey, parents, if you're worried about your kids' safety, why don't you take a half day off work once a week and come and stand guard at the school and go through the training that's necessary and pay to get your credentials?
I mean, well, that's essentially the same as asking our representatives to take a day off from their job to come teach us so that we can pass the STAR test that they made us take. That's essentially the same thing.
Actually, it's not, because it's your life and not your test.
Well, I mean, but it's their test, actually. They want us to take the test just like parents want their kids to be safe. So if you want us to pass the test so bad so that you can get your funding, then you come teach us. And that's essentially the same thing.
Let me broaden the conversation out a little bit, because part of the walkout that some of the students had, and Traylon, you tell me if I'm wrong, but the students, and we saw this in Florida as well, have been calling for more gun control.
Right.
And so you believe in that?
Yes. I mean, I don't think we should ban them at all. I have plenty of family members who carry guns, but they've gotten them legally and they're mentally stable.
And so what would you like to see restricted then?
I mean, I have to be 21 to go buy a bottle of alcohol or something of that sort. But if I were to go to a gun show, I can go pick up a firearm. I'm 18 years old. So, I mean, alcohol can essentially kill someone if used in large amounts, or if used while, if you are intoxicated while operating a motor vehicle. But a gun, if I have a gun and I can essentially take someone's life immediately. I mean, but alcohol, it takes a while before I can take someone's life. So I think that we need to increase the age of who can get guns, mental health screenings, just reform the laws that we currently have to make it better, not necessarily just ban guns and all.
Okay.
Are you prepared to wait until you're 21 to vote as well?
No.
Okay, because that's essentially what would happen. So if you're saying I can't trust an 18-year-old to be able to go out and buy a long gun because they can't buy handguns until they're 21.
Well, if that's the case, we need to lower the drinking age to 18.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, whatever.
There has to be some accountability.
But I'm telling you that's going to take some time and some effort. Okay. But what you want to do, what you're saying is, let's raise the age to buy guns to 21. Well, if you can't be trusted with a firearm, why should you be trusted to vote? Why should you be able to go into the military where they will give you a fully automatic weapon and you sign a check to the government for your life to be able to defend this country? That's what's going to happen if we start talking about raising the gun age to 21.
Essentially, voting has nothing to. I mean, voting has to do with the people who we elect to create these laws. But changing the voting age is implying that I'm not mature enough to know what to do. Essentially, at the age of 18, most people have graduated or are on their way to graduating and from high school. And at that point, you have gone through all of your proper training to know how the government should work. However, at the age of 18, I have not gone through any high school training on how to operate a gun. So they're totally different concepts, because I've taken my government, I've taken my Texas history, U.S. history. I've taken all of these things to understand and learn how the U.S. government works, and other governments, comparative government I've taken as well. But I've never taken a class on gun safety, how to use a gun.
Why not?
Or any. It's not offered.
So let's offer it.
And that's what the school safety means.
Then let's put that in schools.
Let's start.
If guns are so, I'll teach it for free. If guns are so in our culture, then we need to start teaching people about them. I've been shooting since I was 12 years old. It was a part of the culture where I came from. You learned it.
Inner
okay?
city school does not have that luxury.
Well, then let's bring it there.
But how? But
obviously, you've never been an educator, and go in, be a substitute where you live in an elementary, a middle, a high school, and a college. Be a substitute and see what our schools are like. They're not even the same now as when you were in school. Right. Certainly not when we were in school. There are a lot of outside pressures and a lot of outside things that kids are dealing with that we have to do better in helping them. But because of testing and legislative requirements, the loss of funding, it makes it extremely difficult. We are being told, do more with less.
Right.
Teachers, they don't just stop working when they leave school at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. They still have families. They still have schoolwork to do. They're up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to get back to school, some at 7, 7:30 the next morning.
And I love educators. I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but that's life for a lot of people. That's life for a lot of people, even outside of educators.
But there are a lot that are not in shaping students and children's minds to help carry on to make it a better life as they're growing. It's not something we take lightly.
But is there room to do both, in not necessarily at the school, but you're a firearms instructor. How old do you allow people to come in?
10 and up.
10 and up. Mm-hmm. And so that's something you would suggest to parents then, because a lot of parents have guns at home.
Absolutely. The shooting sports promotes accountability, responsibility, discipline, and safety. There is no one else that holds gun owners more accountable than other gun owners. And so the education is there. All you have to do is come and get it.
Tom.
Well, getting back to what could be done. Well, I worked 25 years with ATF, and obviously I think it's important that we should do whatever we can to keep firearms out of the hands of mentally unstable people, violent criminals, terrorists. And I think it's as important to do that than all the money we spend on the drug war. ATF hasn't had a full-time director in years. It's an assistant director. ATF probably has the same amount of special agents today than when I came on in 1987. So you hear a lot of politicians say, enforce the laws on the books. Well, please give us the tools, the people, and the money to do it with.
And you're saying you need more agents?
Oh, my God. There's more policemen in Dallas than there are ATF special agents in the country.
Is that right?
Yes.
And the enforcement of the law is very important because we can't continue to compound laws upon laws, which, by the way, laws don't prevent crimes. Laws are, if you do this bad thing, these are the consequences. That's what a law is. It doesn't create a magical force field to protect people.
But it's
okay?
a deterrent.
It's
but,
reactive
well,
instead of
and I'm not
proactive.
saying that it's not seen as a deterrent. I'm saying it doesn't prevent crime, okay?
But it's reactive.
Well,
though.
you know, rape is illegal, and it didn't keep me from getting raped. Okay? See what I'm saying?
That may be true, but it's
so
reactive.
what I'm telling you is that when we think in terms of laws, we can't compound laws upon laws until we start enforcing the ones that we have. Straw purchases are convicted less than 1% of the time.
Problem with that, though, there is no law on the book against straw purchases. What it is you're lying on the form. And the problem with that, too, is the person who's filling out the form and they pass a background check means that they're not a convicted felon. So when we go in U.S. Attorney's Office and prosecute it for somebody straw purchasing, they're going to look at the criminal history, look at how many guns, or did they accept responsibility. So, and it's just lying on the form. So they don't get enough time.
Well, but maybe we should correct that before we start going into this whole gun ban thing, because to me, that's a little ridiculous.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of things wrong with our government, but specifically the things that we are asking for is something that we've come up with. If people want change on that, then that's what they need to speak up about. But these are our issues that we're speaking up about, and we're going to continue to speak up about them because we feel passionate about it. I mean, but if there are obviously other things wrong with the U.S. government.
And I would agree with you, and I love that you are speaking. I love that you are speaking up about what you are passionate about. But the one thing that I would encourage you to do is you've admitted here today that you literally have no gun education, and so I would encourage you to maybe delve into that a little bit.
How to handle a gun? I have the education.
That goes into it.
Right.
Because if you don't know the capacities and limitations of a firearm, then you essentially have
I know I
no
don't
gun
want to be
training
shot
or gun
in my
knowledge.
classroom. I know I don't want to walk over my classmate's dead body. I know I don't want to look back every time somebody walks in the classroom because someone has a gun. So I know enough to know that if it gets in the wrong hands, and you said earlier that gun owners are hard on other gun owners, but if we look at the shooting in Parkland, Florida, he was not a gun owner. It wasn't his actual gun.
And he took it, and he wasn't supposed to.
Right. So you can be hard on gun owners as all you want, but you can't be hard on people who just go and find guns.
But in order for you to,
we need restrictions on who can get and who can find them and how they can be found, where they get them.
And I agree that needs reform, but we have to be able to trust our government to be able to enforce these things, to be able to report correctly. The FBI has failed. The Air Force has failed. In all the right, but in order to exercise your First Amendment right to be able to speak up about these things, you don't get a First Amendment without a Second Amendment. That's how it is. That's how this country was founded.
Let me ask you this, because the government President Trump just signed the Fix NICS bill, which is to shore up the criminal background check system. NCIS. Fix NICS, NICS. So I'm wondering, Tom, was this step enough?
Well, it helps, and it's not a new law. They're telling the various agencies, do what you were supposed to be doing. If somebody's a convicted felon and, they're in the service, report it to the FBI, so when they go to a gun dealer and try to pass a background check, they'll be denied.
Right, and we saw that in Sutherland Springs, the shooting at the church last year, that had that been reported to the military, had the military reported that to the FBI, perhaps this wouldn't have happened.
It wouldn't have happened with that gun because he would have been denied.
Exactly.
There are a lot of things that can be done and should be done, but we have to have a common sense approach for our schools. Right. There are a lot of people, hopefully, that would volunteer, but they have to be vetted. There has to be better communication between people. Parental involvement has to come into play. And we even have teachers that are gun owners that say we shouldn't have guns in our schools. So with a subject as large as this, there are a million different ideas and thoughts and opinions. But as districts come together, being proactive, having a plan in place, and make sure that people are educated about what they are to do, shouldn't do. Buy a doorstop for every teacher that they could put on the inside of their room so somebody couldn't open that door. You know, things like that. But have those things in place and not wait until something happens at your campus, in your district, next door, you know. And so we have to be proactive, but there are a lot of obstacles that we could continue talking about, but we have to have common sense about all of this. And these people that have this ton of money that are lobbying our legislators are elected to do what's right by the people represented in their district, their constituents, and they're being bought out by the large lobbyists that have all this money, because the greed that we are seeing in our country, in our legislatures, has overcome the true priorities for where we should be.
Before we go, because we're running out of time here, I want to check in with Facebook one more time, Aparna.
Okay, so we have Ron Carter, who says we have to make criminals obey the law versus we must be prepared for when criminals break the law. K. Carr Mays says, why do we have to have gun education? I don't have a gun and I don't want a gun. There are people, believe it or not, that don't want guns. Now it seems Jera is pushing for guns that some people don't want, just because it is part of her culture. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. No one's forcing guns on anyone. This is completely voluntary. But the point is that if you don't understand how firearms work, and if you haven't taken the time to educate yourself, because education overcomes fear, right? I hate sharks. I don't swim in the ocean. But I bet if I educated myself on sea life, I took the time to do that, I would go and swim in the ocean, but I'm not advocating to kill all sea creatures. Right. Do you see what I'm saying?
So I have one other, Julia.
Yes.
She's great. Lower the drinking age to 18.
She liked that idea. Okay. Well, Julia, Kay, and Ron, thank you so much, and everybody who chimed in on Facebook tonight. I can't believe it's an hour. I told you this hour was going to go really quickly. So I want to thank our panel again, Jera, Traylon, Tom, and Rena. Thank you so much. Aparna, thank you so much. Everybody out there on Facebook, we really appreciate it. And now we're going to do I've got to get ready for CBS 11 News at 10. We're going to have a wrap-up of what we discussed here on our 10 o'clock news. We certainly hope you will join us. Thank you for joining us this evening. From all of us here at CBS 11, I'm Jack Fink. Have a great night.